Hillary Clinton is on a TV blitz this week to promote her book, What Happened, and the anchors have largely invited her to recite her take on the campaign and to trash Donald Trump.
Can we talk about another issue you raise in the book? You talk about sexism. Do you think it's harder for Americans to elect a woman than it is an African-American man?
I think there's a lot of evidence.
Having been through your own particular version of the Trump ringer as his political opponent, do you have any advice for his staff?
Well, look, this is a man who engages in humiliation and domination as a tactic of control.
Because of Russia's role, do you think there should be an asterisk next to President Trump's name in the history books?
Look, I don't know. We don't know. We don't have all the facts yet.
Joining us now to analyze the coverage, Gail Trotter, a Washington commentator who writes for Town Hall on the Hill. And in New York, Emily Tish Sussman of the Center for American Progress Action Fund. Gail, would you say the TV people interviewing Hillary, has been a lot of them, Jane Pauley, Matt and Savannah, Anderson Cooper, Rachel Maddow, have been largely sympathetic, or at least at times have tried to pin her down?
They have been largely sympathetic. In general, just the questioning, they let her go on with long questions without journalists usually try to interrupt and
like I'm going to do to you right now. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And particularly in one episode, Anderson Cooper in the interview was listening to Hillary Clinton tell him about how Russian spies no longer dress in black and sneak into people's offices, but they are able to sit in their military headquarters and break into computers. And that would have been a perfect time for Anderson to come back and say, well, what about your insecure server that was accessible? Do you think that that played into the results of what happened in the election? But he didn't. He pivoted to what Republicans would say about that.
Right. Emily.
Well, there was an entire chapter of her book called My Emails. So I do think she actually addressed that head on. I think it's something like those darn emails or something like that. But look, this is her account of the election. It is a historic election on many counts, namely, and including the fact that it was the first time a major party nominated a woman. Right. All of those are important facts.
But what we're trying to focus on here, Emily, is the extent to which, not what she put in the book, but the way in which anchors dealt with her. And I thought the Today Show interview was the toughest, and Matt Lauer mentioned that he'd been criticizing the book. But come on, didn't she get a pretty easy ride?
But I think for that reason, look, you can't go 5 minutes in the media. You can't turn one page without seeing somebody's account of what happened in this election, someone's analysis. I think it's perfectly fair for her to go on a tour giving her analysis. She was actually the candidate. I mean, grilling her for what? Like, for what purpose? She's never going to run for office again. Her husband's never going to run for office again. Like, this is her account. This is her moment in the media to have that account. And I do think they went in. She was so honest in her book about so many things that were played over and over in the media through the course of the election that what would it add in the media to go in and rehash those?
Well, when you say, hold on,
and she answered.
Let me get Gail back in. So when you say rehash, I mean, if she says in the book, yes, I take responsibility, but it's also Jim Comey's fault, the Russians' fault, Bernie Sanders' fault, and it's the media's fault, then why wouldn't an anchor say, what about that, or press her on her argument?
Right, Howie, I would disagree with Emily because there was nothing newsworthy in her book. And this would have been a perfect opportunity for objective journalists to drill down and get something newsworthy. And truly, apart from partisanship, they're not doing the Democratic Party a service, because I think this is equivalent to the RNC 2012 autopsy that the RNC tried to understand how they lost the election to Obama. This would be an opportunity for Judy Woodruff of PBS, I watched her interview, to really drill down on that and try to understand, to get something beyond the talking points that Hillary Clinton just repeats ad nauseum. The amount of coverage devoted to the emails, Putin, Comey, everyone knows how they weigh these things.
Emily, you seem to feel like that Hillary Clinton was candid in her book. Fine, that's a perfectly reasonable conclusion on your part, but you seem to feel that anchors don't have any responsibility to press her about these things. I mean, if Mitt Romney had written a book after losing the 2012 election, you think he would have gotten that kind of kid gloves treatment?
Look, everybody has written a book about every piece of every election, particularly this election. I do think that she had the right to be candid, and I think for every interview I've seen with her, she comes across as incredibly genuine. She is just speaking what she feels happened in this election, and I think the anchors are responding to that. I don't think that it's not that they don't have a responsibility to press her. They're journalists, and look, to Gail's point, whether this helps the Democratic Party or not, again, they're journalists. They are not invested in what happens in the Democratic Party.
Let me jump in because I want to get to one last question. television. Gail Trotter, Hillary says in the book that Fox leads a right-wing war on truth, but she's also mad at Matt Lauer over a debate that he moderated. She's mad at the New York Times for playing up her email scandal, which the paper broke. So she doesn't much like the liberal media either.
She doesn't. I think she plays the victim instead of being like Margaret Thatcher, who was the Iron Lady. She has this feminist ideology that she puts out there, but she's playing the victim. And so when these journalists go out and ask her these tough questions, that benefits not only the Democratic Party, but the American political system. And Glamour magazine, when they wrote an article about whether or not Hillary was correct in saying that white women voted for Trump because their husbands pushed them on that, Anderson Cooper should have asked her about that.
All right, Emily, just to have half a minute. So she's entitled to take her shots at Fox, but again, she seems to still be ticked off at much of the media.
She was quite specific in what she alleged. When she was talking about Fox specifically, she had said there was one rumor in particular that was repeated again and again on the network. And so I think that's fair for her to actually set the record straight. And if we're talking about what happened this election, the media played a huge piece in it. So I think it's very fair for her to critique that and talk about what impact it had overall.
Very fair for her to critique it, and I'm critiquing back. Emily Sussman, Gail Trotter, thanks very much for joining us.